Mysterious encounter in the alien city. The alien city was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The tall, glowing structures rose high into the sky, their shapes twisting in strange ways, like nothing Earth had ever built. The streets were lined with unknown plants that glowed in the dark, casting an eerie light across everything. The air was thick with tension, and there was a deep hum, as though the very ground vibrated with power. In the center of the city, the alien princess was held captive. She was beautiful beyond measure, her skin shimmering with a silvery glow that marked her as someone special. Her delicate features were framed by flowing hair that shifted colors in the light, but there was no joy in her eyes. They had taken her, the last hope of her people, to keep them under control. The alien overlords believed that with her, they could break the spirit of her people and make them bow to their rule forever. The princess struggled in her cell. It was a transparent cube, locked by a complex system that only the highest-ranking aliens could unlock. She had been brought here to break her, to make her bend to their will. But she would not give in. Despite being surrounded by her enemies, her mind was sharp, and her resolve was even sharper. She knew that her people were depending on her, and she would not let them down. Outside her cell, the sounds of the alien city echoed through the air. There were no ordinary voices here. The aliens spoke in a language so alien that it was impossible for a human to understand. The sounds were high-pitched and almost musical, but the language was filled with a coldness that sent shivers down anyone who heard it. The princess heard the footsteps of her captors as they passed by her cell, their movements heavy, determined, and full of power. But in the midst of this alien city, something unexpected happened. A human soldier appeared. He had entered the city under the cover of darkness, sneaking through the streets like a shadow. He was no one special in the eyes of the aliens, just a human, one of the many soldiers who had been sent on a mission. But to the princess, this soldier was the only person who could save her. The soldier's name was Captain Elias. He was young, but his eyes carried the weight of many battles. His body was lean but strong, and his mind was quick, always thinking 2 steps ahead. He had been part of a secret mission to rescue the princess, but the odds were against him. The alien city was vast and filled with dangers. The soldier knew that he was alone in this mission, and yet, as he moved through the dark streets, he felt a strange sense of purpose. It wasn't just the mission, it was something deeper. He had heard of the princess's bravery and the stories of how she had fought to protect her people. He had seen the look in her eyes in the messages he received, and he knew she was someone worth fighting for. As he crept through the shadows, he could feel the eyes of the alien soldiers watching him from hidden places. The city was alive, but not in the way that Earth was. Everything here seemed foreign, alien to his very being. Yet Elias moved forward, determined. He knew the risk. If he was caught, the aliens would destroy him without a second thought. But the princess, she was worth the risk. He reached the palace where she was being held. The building was enormous, its walls thick and made of an unknown metal that seemed to shimmer in the light. Guards stood at every entrance, and the air was filled with the sound of distant conversations in that chilling alien language. Elias studied the situation carefully. There were too many guards, and he would be seen if he didn't act fast. The soldier took a deep breath and scanned the surroundings, looking for a way in. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a narrow passageway to the side. It was hidden in the shadows, and the guards did not seem to notice it. Elias moved quickly, his steps light and silent, until he was at the entrance to the princess's prison. The walls of the palace were covered with strange symbols, glowing softly in the darkness. Elias didn't understand them, but he didn't need to. His mission was clear: rescue the princess and get her out. He approached the princess's cell, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, he saw her for the first time. She was beautiful, but it wasn't her looks that caught his attention. It was the sadness in her eyes. She sat in the corner, her head bowed slightly, as though she was thinking about something far away. She looked up when she heard him approach, her eyes widening in surprise. She had not expected to see a human here, much less one willing to fight for her freedom. Elias stood still for a moment, unsure of what to say. The princess was so different from anyone he had ever met. She was powerful in ways he could never understand. But in this moment, she needed him. And for the first time in a long while, Elias felt that he was doing something truly important. He reached out to her, offering a silent promise that he would do everything in his power to get her out. The princess looked at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. She could hardly believe that a human soldier had come to save her. The aliens had told her that humans were weak, that they were nothing compared to the might of the alien empire. But now, in this moment, she realized just how wrong they were. This human, this soldier, was willing to risk everything for her. For a fleeting moment, their eyes locked, and the princess knew that this was not just about her. It was about something greater, something that could change the fate of their worlds forever. The princess whispered, "Thank you." Elias nodded, his voice barely a whisper as he replied, "We have to get you out of here." And so, the strange alliance between a human soldier and an alien princess began. The alien city around them was filled with danger. But Elias was determined. And for the princess, the human soldier's courage gave her hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for freedom. The human soldier's courageous decision. As the night grew deeper, the shadows of the alien city seemed to stretch longer, swallowing up everything in their path. The streets were quiet now, but the air hummed with an unnatural tension, as though the city itself was waiting for something to happen. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed off the metallic walls, a reminder that the alien soldiers were always watching, always alert. Every corner of this city was dangerous, yet the human soldier, Elias, pressed forward, his mind focused on the task ahead. Elias had always been trained to fight. It was what he did best. He had seen battles, lost comrades, and faced enemies far stronger and more numerous than the ones surrounding him now. But nothing could have prepared him for the decision that lay ahead. Saving the princess wasn't just a mission. It was a matter of life and death. The alien city was built to imprison hope, to crush any resistance with overwhelming force. Yet here he was, a lone human, deciding whether to risk everything for someone he had never met. The moment Elias had set foot in this alien city, he knew the odds were stacked against him. The enemies here were relentless, their technology far more advanced than anything he had ever seen. But it wasn't the weapons or the machines that worried him most. It was the uncertainty. The princess, an alien unlike any other, was held captive in a complex far from the city's main hub. Her beauty and grace were legendary, yet they were also the reasons she was in such danger. To the aliens, she was a symbol of defiance. To Elias, she was someone worth saving. He stopped just outside the palace walls, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. He had only one shot at this. If he failed, it would mean certain death, not just for him, but for the princess too. The alien soldiers would have no mercy. His eyes scanned the area, searching for a weakness, a way in. Everything about this place was alien to him, but he had trained for moments like these. His hand rested on the grip of his blaster, and his fingers twitched with anticipation. In the silence, Elias heard the princess's voice in his mind. It wasn't something he could explain. It wasn't a voice he had actually heard. It was more like a feeling, a sense of urgency that pushed him forward. He could sense her fear, her helplessness. He could feel the deep sorrow in her heart, as though she had already accepted her fate. But Elias refused to believe that. He couldn't. There had to be another way. He looked up at the glowing palace. The walls were smooth and seemingly impenetrable, but there was something about the structure that felt vulnerable. A tiny crack in the design, a sliver of opportunity. He could feel it. The walls weren't invincible. Nothing ever was. Elias's training kicked in. He knew what had to be done. He couldn't stand by it while someone was suffering. He couldn't let this alien city break her spirit, not when there was still a chance to save her. Without thinking any further, he moved. His body acted before his mind could catch up. His boots barely made a sound against the metal ground as he sprinted to the side of the palace, ducking into the shadows of a narrow alley. He had to find a way to enter without being detected. As he crept closer, Elias realized the enormity of the task before him. The soldiers inside would never expect an attack from a human. The princess was considered just a bargaining chip, and the aliens underestimated the power of human determination. He could see it now, clearer than ever. This wasn't just about saving a princess. This was about proving that humans weren't weak, that they could stand against overwhelming odds and come out victorious. Elias found a small access door, hidden behind a dark corner. It was guarded by two alien soldiers, their faces cold and expressionless. Their weapons were raised, scanning the area for any sign of danger. Elias's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. His hands moved quickly, pulling a small, silenced dart gun from his side. With precise aim, he fired 2 darts, hitting both guards in the neck. They collapsed without a sound, unconscious before they even hit the ground. He didn't waste time. Elias moved swiftly to the door, bypassing the security lock with ease. He had studied the alien technology for months, learning their systems and finding ways to bypass them. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Elias stepped inside, breathing deeply. The air was cooler in here, sterile, and smelled faintly of metal and antiseptic. He couldn't waste time thinking about the smell. His mission was clear: find the princess, get her out, and escape. Elias moved cautiously through the hallways, his footsteps light and deliberate. The palace was labyrinthine, twisting and turning in ways that made it easy to get lost. But he was used to this. He had learned to read the flow of the environment, to sense where danger lay and where there might be a way out. Every step was calculated, every decision made with the knowledge that he couldn't afford to make a mistake. Finally, after what felt like hours of moving through the dark corridors, he reached the princess's cell. The moment he laid eyes on her, he knew this was the point of no return. The princess was unlike anything he had expected. She was not just beautiful, she was powerful in a way he had never seen before. Her eyes, even in captivity, held a light that refused to be dimmed. Elias felt a deep respect for her, but also an overwhelming sense of responsibility. As he approached her cell, the princess looked up, her eyes widening with surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to come for her, let alone a human. But Elias didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "I'm here to get you out." The princess stared at him for a moment, disbelief flashing across her face. You're a human." Elias nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm here to fight for you. We don't give up on people we care about." And in that moment, the princess knew that the human soldier wasn't just here to complete a mission. He was here because, deep down, he believed in something greater, something she had almost forgotten in her time of despair. The battle for survival. The moment Elias unlocked the princess's cell, the world seemed to shift into slow motion. The quiet hum of the alien city grew louder in his ears, and his heart raced in anticipation. He could feel the weight of his mission pressing down on him, but there was no turning back now. He had come this far, and the princess was depending on him. The princess stood up, her eyes still filled with disbelief. She had never imagined a human, let alone a soldier, would come to her rescue. Elias could see the flicker of hope in her eyes, the same hope he had seen in countless battles before, a flame that refused to be extinguished. You're real," the princess whispered, her voice shaky but grateful. Elias nodded, but there was no time for words now. "We need to move. Fast." As they turned to leave, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway. Elias's instincts kicked in, and he grabbed the princess's arm, pulling her into a dark corner. They pressed themselves against the cold, metal wall, breathing as quietly as possible, hoping they wouldn't be discovered. Elias could hear the soldiers coming closer, too close for comfort. "Stay down," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The princess nodded, her body tense with fear, but also a strange excitement. She had never felt anything like this before, this raw, desperate need to escape, to survive. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had someone with her, someone who had come for her, someone willing to face the impossible for her sake. The alien soldiers passed by, their steps heavy and synchronized, their weapons scanning for any sign of intrusion. Elias's grip on his blaster tightened, ready for a fight. The soldiers were on high alert, and if they were discovered, it would be a battle for their lives. As the soldiers moved past, Elias and the princess slowly emerged from their hiding spot. The princess glanced at Elias, her expression a mix of determination and fear. "How much further?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We're close," Elias replied, though he knew that meant little. The danger was always close. There was no safe place here. They moved quickly but cautiously, the silence of their steps almost eerie in the oppressive quiet of the palace. The further they went, the more tense the air became. The corridors were like a maze, every turn leading them deeper into the heart of enemy territory. Elias could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as they moved through the long halls. They were not alone, and he knew it. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared, breaking the silence. The princess's face went pale, and Elias's heart sank. They had been spotted. The soldiers must have found a breach in the security system. The countdown to disaster had begun. "Run," Elias ordered, grabbing the princess's hand and pulling her into a sprint. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the halls as they ran, the blaring alarm amplifying the urgency of their escape. They passed through corridors that twisted and turned, each one more confusing than the last. But Elias was a soldier, and he had learned to navigate even the most chaotic situations. The princess, though not as fast as Elias, kept up with surprising speed, her determination giving her strength. As they rounded a corner, a group of alien soldiers appeared ahead, their weapons raised. Elias didn't hesitate. With a quick motion, he drew his blaster and fired, the weapon's shots striking the soldiers before they even had a chance to react. The soldiers dropped, unconscious or dead, but the noise had alerted even more guards. "They'll be everywhere," Elias muttered under his breath. They had no time to waste. They had to keep moving. "Which way?" the princess asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "Left," Elias shouted. He didn't know how much time they had before more reinforcements arrived, but he had to keep her alive. He pushed forward, the princess following close behind. The sound of alien soldiers marching toward them grew louder. They had to get out of the palace and into the streets, where Elias hoped he would have a better chance of defending them. But there was one problem. The exit was on the other side of the palace, and it was heavily guarded. As they neared the exit, a squad of alien soldiers appeared at the door. They were blocking the only escape route. Elias cursed under his breath. They were trapped. The soldiers raised their weapons, preparing to fire. Elias instinctively placed himself between the princess and the threat, his blaster aimed and ready. There was no way out without a fight. "You should have stayed in your cell, human," one of the soldiers sneered, their voice filled with contempt. Elias's heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. He had no choice now. He had to fight to the very end. He couldn't let the princess fall into their hands again. With a steady hand, he fired at the closest soldier, the shot landing squarely in the chest. The alien fell, and chaos erupted. The princess, seeing the soldier's courage, stepped forward, surprising Elias. She was not just a captive anymore. She had power in her, something the aliens had underestimated. She quickly grabbed one of the fallen soldier's weapons and joined Elias in the fight. The two of them, working together, took down the remaining guards with swift precision. The princess's natural agility and Elias's skill with a weapon made them a formidable team, and the soldiers didn't stand a chance. But the noise had drawn even more enemies. Elias could hear the heavy thud of footsteps echoing down the hallway. They needed to move, and fast. "Come on," Elias shouted, grabbing the princess's arm again and pulling her toward the door. They dashed through the exit, but as they reached the open streets, they were met with yet another squad of alien soldiers. This time, there was no choice but to fight their way through. The battle was fierce, with blaster fire lighting up the night. Elias and the princess fought side by side, their movements quick and precise. The soldiers tried to surround them, but Elias was always one step ahead, directing the princess to cover and making sure she stayed safe. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they managed to fight their way out of the street and into the dark alleys of the city. The sounds of battle still echoed in the distance, but they had made it out for now. As they paused to catch their breath, the princess looked at Elias, her expression one of awe. "I never thought I'd be free again," she whispered, her voice soft with gratitude. Elias nodded, his breath ragged but determined. "You are now, and I'll make sure it stays that way." The hidden power of the human soldier. After escaping the palace and finding a temporary refuge in the back streets of the alien city, Elias and the princess leaned against the cold, steel wall of a dark alley, catching their breath. The night air was thick, filled with the scent of alien metals and strange flowers that had a pungent, almost sickly sweetness to them. Elias could hear the distant hum of the city, the rhythm of its strange energy pulsing through the ground beneath them. But for now, they were safe, at least for a moment. They had made it out of the heart of the enemy stronghold, but the danger was far from over. The princess, her breathing still uneven from the escape, looked at Elias with a new sense of wonder. She had seen humans before, but never like this. Never one so determined, so fearless. She had never imagined a human could stand against such overwhelming odds, let alone come to her rescue. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "What is it that drives you?" Elias wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to steady his breath. His muscles ached from the battle, and the weight of their escape still pressed heavily on him. But he wasn't done yet. He couldn't be. Not now. He turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "I'm just a soldier," he replied, his voice rough. "I do what I'm trained to do. Fight, survive, protect." The princess raised an eyebrow, her silver eyes narrowing as she studied him. "You are much more than just a soldier. I've seen soldiers before. None of them would have risked their life for a stranger." Elias smiled faintly, a distant look in his eyes. "I didn't start out as a soldier. I used to be just a man, fighting to survive. But then, things happened. I lost people I cared about, friends, family, and in that loss, I learned what it really means to fight. Not just for yourself, but for something bigger." The princess listened closely, her heart stirred by his words. "And what is it that you fight for now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, filled with a mix of awe and something else. Something deeper. Elias didn't hesitate. "I fight for hope. For the chance that things can be different. For the idea that no matter how dark it gets, there's always a way to push forward. For the people who can't fight for themselves. And now, I fight for you." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, a quiet, powerful promise. The princess looked at him, the weight of his words settling deep inside her. She had never expected to find such resolve in a human, someone who was willing to sacrifice everything, not just for a cause, but for her. But Elias wasn't just any soldier. There was something different about him, something hidden beneath the surface. It wasn't just his training, his strength, or his resilience. There was an inner fire inside him that burned brighter than anything she had ever seen. It was a force that seemed almost supernatural. "I don't understand," she said softly, her voice tinged with confusion. "How is it possible that you, someone like you, could have this strength? You're just a human, after all." She stopped herself, catching her words, but Elias understood. "We're different," He finished for her, his eyes steady and calm. "But maybe we're not as different as you think." The princess frowned, trying to comprehend what he meant. "You don't see it, do you?" she asked, stepping closer to him. "You don't see what you've become. You didn't just fight to survive. You fought because you believe in something. And that belief, Elias, that's your power. That's what makes you more than just a soldier." Elias shook his head, unsure of what she meant. "I don't have any special power. I'm just me." The princess smiled, her expression filled with a gentle understanding. "No, Elias. You've carried the weight of your past, your losses, and instead of allowing it to break you, you've used it to fuel something even greater. You fight not because you have to, but because you choose to. And that's a power that no weapon or army can ever defeat." For the first time since they had met, Elias felt a sense of clarity. The weight he had been carrying all these years, the pain from his past, the constant struggle, it wasn't a burden anymore. It was his strength. And the princess was right. His belief, his choice to keep fighting, was the very thing that made him stronger than any enemy he had ever faced. He looked at her, his gaze softening. "I don't know if I can win this fight, but I'll fight it until the end. Not just for you, but for everyone who's ever felt like they had no voice. For everyone who's ever been told they didn't matter." The princess nodded, a look of deep respect in her eyes. "You've already won, Elias. You've already given us something worth fighting for. You've given us hope." Just then, the faint sound of distant footsteps caught their attention. Elias's instincts flared. The time for reflection was over. The princess's escape wasn't without consequences, and the aliens would be closing in. But Elias wasn't afraid. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He had become something greater. And now, with the princess by his side, they were ready to face whatever came next. They moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, their silent determination guiding them through the dark alleyways of the alien city. Elias was no longer just a man fighting for survival. He was the embodiment of hope, of resilience, and of a future that refused to be defeated. And as they moved forward, side by side, the princess realized something else. She wasn't just being saved by Elias. She was being changed by him, by his strength, by his will. And together, they were about to challenge the very forces that sought to destroy them both. A dangerous escape plan. The city of the aliens was a labyrinth of steel and stone, and it was becoming more and more evident that Elias and the princess couldn't simply run forever. The narrow back streets and alleyways they had navigated so far were no longer safe. The alien forces were hunting them, and every step they took brought them closer to the edge of danger. Elias knew that sooner or later they would be trapped, unless they acted fast. The princess, still shaken from their escape, was no longer the fragile captive she had been in the palace. She had changed, just as Elias had. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, but they needed a plan. A bold, daring plan to get out of the city and away from the overwhelming enemy forces. Elias paused as they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a vast square, the epicenter of the alien city. Bright lights illuminated the area, and dozens of soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their glowing weapons ready. The center of the square seemed to pulse with an energy all its own, radiating from a massive floating structure. Elias had seen something like it before in the intelligence reports. This was their main transportation hub, where the alien ships were docked, ready to take off at a moment's notice. The only way out of the city was through this square, but getting there was no easy feat. The princess stepped up beside him, looking out at the scene below. She had been quiet for most of their journey, her mind racing as she considered their options. "There's no way we can get past them without being spotted," she said quietly. "We'll never make it." Elias turned his gaze toward her, his brow furrowed in thought. "We won't just get past them. We'll make them think we're already gone." The princess raised an eyebrow. "How?" Elias's lips curled into a slight, confident smile. "We create a diversion. Something big enough to draw all their attention to one side of the city. While they're focused on that, we slip past. The princess considered his words carefully. It was risky, extremely risky, but it was their only shot. A diversion, she repeated, as if trying to picture it. But we have to make it convincing enough that they don't come after us immediately. If they even suspect a trick, we won't let them suspect anything. Elias cut her off, his tone firm. We'll make it too real. We'll use their own technology against them. The plan began to form in Elias's mind. It wasn't the kind of plan that relied on precision or stealth. It was bold, noisy, and chaotic. A plan that would force the enemy to react quickly, not knowing what hit them. But it also meant putting themselves in the heart of the danger zone. They had no room for error. Elias's hand instinctively went to the small pack he carried with him, pulling out a strange-looking device. It was a piece of alien tech he had managed to steal during their initial escape. It had been a lucky break. He wasn't sure exactly how it worked, but he knew enough to make it do what he needed. "This is what will make it real," he said, showing the princess the device. "It's a cloaking disruptor. If we place this near the power source in the square, it'll disable their ability to cloak their ships, creating a large, chaotic signal that'll confuse their radar. They won't be able to track us, and they'll think there's a bigger problem than a couple of escaped prisoners." The princess studied the device with growing understanding. "You plan to cause a ship-wide system failure." Elias nodded. "Exactly. And while they're scrambling to fix it, we'll be long gone. We'll get to the transport station, steal a ship, and leave the city. It's risky, but it's our best shot." The princess hesitated for a moment, looking out over the city as if considering the weight of what was about to happen. She had never seen a human so calm in the face of danger. Elias seemed to embrace it. He thrived on it, like a storm chaser in the middle of a hurricane. She, on the other hand, had spent most of her life in the comfort of her palace, sheltered from the realities of battle and survival. But Elias had awakened something in her, a fierce determination to take control of her own fate. "Then we do it," she said, her voice resolute. "I trust you." Elias smiled, though it was a hard, determined smile. "We don't have time for second thoughts. Let's move." They carefully retraced their steps, making their way toward the heart of the city, their footsteps echoing in the dark as they worked their way through hidden paths and narrow tunnels. They couldn't afford to make noise or draw attention. Every step was calculated, every movement made with purpose. The city seemed to breathe around them, a constant reminder that danger was always lurking just beyond the shadows. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the square. It was bigger than Elias had anticipated, and the number of soldiers patrolling the area was even greater. The power station was located in the center, surrounded by a high reinforced wall. A tall tower stretched into the sky, its base thrumming with energy. The power supply for the entire city, and the ships that guarded it, lay within. Elias crouched low, taking in the scene. "We'll need to climb to that tower. Get as close as we can to the power source without being seen. The device has to be within range for it to work." The princess nodded, her eyes scanning the area, her mind already calculating the risks. "And once it's activated, we'll have about 5 minutes before the system starts to glitch. We'll have to move quickly," Elias replied, his mind already racing through the steps. "I'll place the disruptor near the core, and you cover me. Can you handle that?" The princess glanced at him, a determined fire in her eyes. "I've learned to handle a lot more than that." Elias gave her a nod of approval, then motioned for her to follow him. They crept toward the tower, moving carefully and keeping to the shadows. The tension was unbearable, but Elias's mind was calm, focused on the task at hand. He could feel the weight of their plan pushing down on him, but he wouldn't let fear take hold. Not now. They reached the base of the tower and began to climb, the silence around them making each movement feel more dangerous than it was. But as they neared the top, their luck began to turn. One of the alien guards below seemed to spot something, a flicker in the shadows. a sound they hadn't accounted for. "Stay low," Elias whispered, pulling the princess into a crouch. The guard looked toward them, but just as quickly, another noise pulled his attention elsewhere. Elias's heart hammered in his chest, but they kept moving, each step bringing them closer to the core. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Elias reached the power source and activated the disruptor. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the hum of the city's energy grid faltered, sending a shockwave through the square. The cloaking field around the alien ships vanished, and chaos erupted. Soldiers screamed, rushing to assess the damage, not realizing that Elias and the princess had slipped through the cracks. "We have 5 minutes," Elias muttered under his breath. His eyes locked onto the ships in the distance. It was time to move. The final stand against impossible odds. The chaos had only just begun. The alien city, once so calm and controlled, now seemed to tremble with the sound of alarms blaring across its towering walls. The disruptor had done its job. Every ship was visible, every cloaked force exposed. But the repercussions were immediate and overwhelming. The alien forces scrambled to contain the damage, their frantic movements only adding to the confusion. Elias and the princess had only a few precious moments before their brief advantage would slip away. They ran through the disorienting maze of streets, their hearts racing as they made their way toward the transport station. The sky above, once a cold, distant blue, was now tinged with the unnatural glow of alien craft hovering in place, ready to pursue or destroy anything that moved. The city was on lockdown, the air crackling with energy from the ships and the power grid. The sound of approaching patrols echoed, growing louder by the second. Elias gritted his teeth. "We have to move faster," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "They won't stay confused for long." The princess nodded, her face a mask of determination. She had been trained in diplomacy, in leadership, and in the art of being untouchable, but she had never been in a situation like this. She had never felt so vulnerable, yet so alive. Elias, the human soldier who had saved her, had shown her a side of herself she never knew existed. A side that could survive, that could fight for what mattered. The weight of the transport station ahead, the last barrier between them and escape, felt unbearable. It loomed large and intimidating in the distance, guarded by more soldiers than Elias had ever hoped to face in a single battle. But there was no turning back now. They had come this far. They reached the station's outer perimeter, their breathing heavy but synchronized. Elias motioned for the princess to stay behind as he peered around the corner. "There's too many of them," he muttered under his breath. "If we don't make it past this next group, we're done." The princess was silent for a moment, her thoughts racing. Then she did something Elias didn't expect. She stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "We'll make it," she said firmly. "Together." Elias looked at her, for the first time seeing the full strength in her eyes. She wasn't just a princess. She wasn't just someone to protect. She was a partner, someone who shared the same fight, the same desperation to escape this nightmare. They were no longer two separate beings with different goals. They were one force, pushing against the odds. "We'll need a distraction," Elias said, his voice low, sharp. "Something to pull their attention away long enough for us to slip in." The princess's eyes brightened as she turned to face the area in front of them. "I can create that distraction." Elias gave her a confused look. "What do you mean?" She smiled, a flash of something dangerous in her expression. "I've spent years in the heart of this empire. I know how their systems work. I know how they think." She turned away before he could stop her, moving quickly and silently toward the control panels near the station's entrance. Elias hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to stop her, to keep her safe. But he knew, deep down, that this was the only way. The princess wasn't just a leader. She was a master of strategy. She understood the alien mind better than anyone else ever could. She was their best chance. Elias held his breath as she approached the panel, tapping into the alien technology with precise movements. The hum of the station's system slowed, then stopped, and with a final series of blips, the security field went down. "Go," the princess called, looking over her shoulder with a satisfied grin. "Now." Elias didn't hesitate. He surged forward, his muscles burning from exhaustion, but his mind sharp with the clarity of their mission. They were on the final leg of their journey. Their escape was almost within their grasp. But as they neared the entrance to the transport area, they were met by a line of alien soldiers. At least a dozen stood between them and freedom. The soldiers were closing in fast, and the sound of their footsteps was deafening. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as the last of their options faded away. They had no more time for stealth or speed. The only option now was to fight. With a swift motion, Elias drew his blaster. The princess was already moving, her eyes fierce as she activated a weapon of her own, something she had taken from the enemy's arsenal during their escape. It was a sleek alien blaster that hummed with power. "Stay close," Elias shouted, his voice filled with resolve. The first wave of alien soldiers advanced on them, weapons raised and ready. They didn't hesitate, knowing that their objective was simple: capture or kill the intruders. But Elias was faster. He fired the first shot, a clean hit that sent one soldier crashing to the ground. The princess was right beside him, moving with swift precision. She took out another soldier, a series of quick, fluid movements that demonstrated just how well she had adapted to the situation. Elias moved like a machine, each shot landing with deadly accuracy, his instincts honed by years of survival. But the soldiers kept coming. The odds were stacked against them, and they both knew it. Elias's pulse quickened as the number of soldiers seemed to multiply, but he pushed that fear away. There was no room for doubt now. There was only survival. "Stay down," Elias barked as the princess fired another round, taking out two more soldiers. The tension was unbearable, the air crackling with the sound of gunfire and the screams of their enemies. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the fight becoming an endless blur of movement and instinct. Finally, Elias spotted an opening, a small gap in the line of soldiers. "Go," he shouted to the princess. "I'll cover you." She didn't hesitate, charging forward as Elias kept the remaining soldiers at bay. He fired shot after shot, his heart racing as he felt the weight of their escape pressing harder on his shoulders. The princess reached the gap, ducking behind cover as she sprinted toward the transport ships. Elias continued to hold off the oncoming soldiers, his mind screaming at him to retreat, to run. But he wouldn't abandon her. Not now. As the princess reached the transport ship and climbed into the cockpit, Elias fired his final shot, hitting the last of the soldiers just as he reached the doorway. The door slammed shut, and Elias heard the powerful hum of the ship's engines coming to life. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The air, the city, the battlefield, all of it suspended in time. Then, with a roar, the ship lifted off the ground, its engines blasting to life. They had done it. Elias's heart skipped a beat as he watched the ship ascend into the sky, leaving the chaos of the alien city behind. He had led them to freedom. They had made it. Victory and a new beginning. The roar of the ship's engines faded into the vastness of the sky, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Elias allowed himself to breathe. His fingers, still gripping the controls, trembled ever so slightly as he glanced over at the princess. She was staring out the window, her silver eyes reflecting the stars that slowly began to reveal themselves in the darkened expanse. They had made it. The alien city, with its towering spires and ruthless soldiers, was now far behind them, shrinking with every passing second. But even as they sped toward freedom, Elias knew that the journey was far from over. They had escaped the immediate danger, yes, but what lay ahead was just as uncertain. The princess, the beacon of hope for her people, was now a fugitive, and he, the soldier who had risked everything to protect her, had unwittingly become a symbol of something more, something greater than himself. "You did it," the princess said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable warmth behind her words. She turned to him, her gaze softening. "You saved us both." Elias didn't respond immediately. He was still processing everything that had happened, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. His mind raced with questions about what came next. There was no going back to the way things were. Their lives had been changed forever. But for now, he needed to focus on the present. "Not just me," Elias finally replied, his voice steady. "We did it. Together." The princess smiled, a genuine smile this time, and for the first time, Elias saw the true strength in her eyes. She had once been a captive, a symbol of her people's suffering, but now she was something else entirely. She was a leader in the truest sense, a woman who had found the courage to fight not just for her survival, but for the future of her world. And in doing so, she had helped him see the power of hope, the kind of hope that could change the fate of an entire galaxy. "We've only just begun," the princess said, her voice growing stronger, more certain. "This isn't over. The aliens won't stop coming after us." Elias nodded. He had known that from the start. But now, they had something the enemy didn't, each other. And that made all the difference. The ship's navigation system beeped, signaling that they were approaching a small, hidden planet on the edge of the galaxy. A safe haven, far from the reach of their enemies. The planet was uninhabited, a place where they could regroup and make plans. It was their first step toward building something new, something that had never been possible before. "What now?" Elias asked, his eyes flicking to the control panel, the path ahead clear, but still uncertain. The princess turned to face him, her expression a mix of determination and something else. "Hope. Now we rebuild," she said softly. "We gather the people who are still fighting, the ones who believe in a future where we are free. And we take back what's ours." Elias felt a surge of something inside him, a deep, unwavering certainty. He had seen countless battles, fought wars on countless planets, but this was different. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about something worth fighting for. This was about freedom, justice, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for something better. "We'll need a plan," Elias said, his voice steady with conviction. The princess nodded, her eyes shining with newfound resolve. "We'll make one. Together." And just like that, something shifted. Elias realized that for the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone. The battle ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, dangers, and countless enemies. But with the princess by his side, they had a chance to turn the tide. They were no longer just a soldier and a princess. They were allies, equals, bound by the same cause. As the ship landed softly on the quiet, barren planet, Elias stepped out, the cool air brushing against his face. The stars above were distant, but there was a sense of peace in this place, a fleeting moment of calm before the storm. He looked to the princess, who was already walking toward the edge of the platform, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We will not forget who we are," she said, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had been through. "And we will make sure that no one else has to suffer under the tyranny we've escaped." Elias stood beside her, looking out at the vast emptiness of the planet before them. It was a blank canvas, a place where anything could be built, where anything could happen. The galaxy was vast, and there were many battles yet to fight. But the first battle, the one that had brought them together, had been won. With a deep breath, Elias felt a quiet confidence settle within him. The fight for their future had just begun, but this time, they were ready.